Everybody, welcome to Decision 22, our House of Delegates State Senate Forum here, Washington County Chamber of Commerce. We're glad you're here this morning. I'm Paul Fry, President of Washington County Chamber, and we will be on Facebook Live here this morning. And if you go to Washington County Chamber of Commerce to our Facebook page, you can find us. So we're happy to have you, whether you're here in person or virtually. Again, we're glad to be here this morning, our third of 5 forums this year. We have our host sponsor, Jamison Door Company. We'll hear from them here shortly. Our supporting sponsor is Penmar Realtors, and we're in partnership with the Washington County League of Women Voters. We're glad to have all of them part of this. Our moderator this morning will be Richard Wilson. We will introduce Richard here shortly, and wanted to acknowledge one of our elected officials here in attendance, not already running for office today. We have our Mayor Emily Keller. Good morning. Welcome. We also have our candidates for the House of Delegates, our candidates for Maryland State Senate, whom you'll meet here shortly. We'd also like to mention a few upcoming events. We have tomorrow evening our Business and Social Hour. It's going to be at Thick and Thin Brewery over by the Walmart on Route 65. If you haven't been there, it's a great facility. And if you're a chamber member and you're registered by noon tomorrow and you show up, and you're there at about 6 o'clock, you'll be eligible for the jackpot of $8,250. So every chamber member is entered to win, but you have to be there to win and be registered by tomorrow at noon. So that'll be exciting to give that away. Our forum next week is for the Maryland 6th Congressional District Forum. We'll have our 2 candidates here for that, Neil Parrott and also David Trone. And then on November 10th, we'll be hearing from Dr. Anirban Basu at our 20th Annual Economic Summit. That's going to be at Fountainhead Country Club. You can go to Washington or Hagerstown.org to register. So we'll look forward to hearing from Dr. Basu. He'll talk about the economy from the international level all the way here to Hagerstown and Washington County. And lastly, on November 18th, on Friday, we have a master class. We saw Glenn Shepard here locally at the library a couple weeks ago. We sold out Glenn's seminar that day. He will be doing a 45-minute master class virtually, how to manage the 5 different generations in the workplace. And he had a great presentation the day he was here, and that'll be free and open to the public. You'll see some registration information. I highly recommend, if you have 45 minutes on the 18th, to consider registering for that. Again, there's no charge. We all have a lot of folks we work with. It's interesting to hear his perspective on how to work with our different generations. And now it's my pleasure to bring up Dwight Clark. Dwight Clark's the president of Jamison Door Company, and they're our sponsor. Let's welcome Dwight.
Hi, good morning, everyone. For 115 years, Jamison Door Company has been an integral part of the downtown area as well as Washington County as a whole. And it's our pleasure to be able to sponsor events like this that we feel benefit the community as a whole. So good luck to everybody, and we wish everybody well, and thanks for turning out.
Thank you, Dwight, and we do acknowledge the fact we run for office. It's not easy. It's in addition to your other work you're doing and your family commitments and your personal commitments, so we applaud those candidates who are running for office. And speaking of candidates running for office, before I bring up Richard Wilson, I want to read a statement about the folks who are here this morning. All the candidates for the local state senator and delegate races were invited to attend this morning's candidate forum. As you can see, and as you will see, I know 5 are here. A 6th person should be here. They'll be here this morning. Two of the candidates not with us this morning, Ms. Hinton, Legislative District 1C, and Mr. Quarterman, running for State Senate Legislative District 2, had other commitments that could not be rescheduled. Mr. Valentine and Mr. Wyville, Legislative District 2A, are running unopposed. So we mutually decided that they would not intend to allow more time for the other candidates who are running for contested races to hear from them. Ms. McBurty, Legislative District 1C, did not respond to invitations to participate. So we'll hear from 5 of our candidates for sure. I saw Mr. Baker yesterday. He said he would be here, so when he comes, we'll get him inserted with us. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce and bring up our moderator, Mr. Wilson. He's on the Government Affairs Committee. He'll be moderating. Let's welcome Mr. Wilson.
To be fair, this morning, we have arranged our questions and the amount of time allowed for the candidate responses to provide each person the same number of airtime minutes and as well the same number or the privilege of being first asked a question. I will be reading a question, telling you the time that we have allotted and then telling you which candidate it is being directed to before I call on you for your response. And when questions are being asked, if you would like me to repeat a question, I'd be glad to do that. You may use the unexpired portion of your time. If you are given 2 minutes for a question and there was a previous question and you've wrapped it up in 1 minute and 45, you've got 15 seconds left on your clock. You can respond to a previous question with that time. Today we will have some 2-minute questions. Most of them will be 1-minute questions, and we have a surprise 30-second question that we're going to slip in. When only 15 seconds remain, Ms. Long will hold up the yellow card that you see there, and she'll have a backup card that means please finish the sentence or thought that you're in the middle of, but don't start another one. Okay, will the candidates please take their place? We've got the name tags there. Those are not necessarily the order in which we will be addressing the questions to you. I see Mr. Baker has arrived. That's great. Right on time to take your seat. Our first question will be asked of all of you, so you can be relaxed about that part of it. It will be a 2-minute question. If elected in November, you will become a member of the Washington County Delegation. We would like to start by giving each of you the 2 minutes to introduce yourselves and to please include what you see as your most important responsibilities as part of our county delegation. And Mr. Baker, we will begin with you.
Wow. I guess I misread the invitation. I thought we were going to get served breakfast at 7:30. That's what I read.
It looks
So
like you misread the
That's all right.
invitation.
Anyhow, well, good morning. Thank you all for having me here today. It's quite an honor to be at this forum, and it's quite an honor to represent Washington County citizens. And hopefully I'll be representing all of Maryland with a emphasis on my District 1C. To me, one of the most, well, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a former president and vice president of Washington County Commissioners, well, currently vice president. I'm also I was a council member for the town of Clear Spring. I'm a lifelong educator. I taught in the trades, which is very important to our community. And I'm an avid hunter, Second Amendment advocate, and I'm also a small business owner. I have a small home improvement business. The most important thing for me when I get to Annapolis is going to be building relationships. I'm going to be representing District 1C, but more importantly, I'm going to be part of representing the whole state of Maryland. And my job is going to be to do all that I can to help my community here in Washington County and Allegheny County benefit. So the most important responsibility is going to be building alliances and getting along with the other delegation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Next, we turn to Mr. Perry.
Good morning, and thanks for having me today. As you said, my name is Sean Perry, and a little bit about me. I'm an Army veteran. I'm a retired police officer from the city of Frederick. I've been a substitute teacher. I have done background investigations for the federal government, and now I serve as an advocate for our seniors. So the most important thing for us as elected officials is to bring back the trust that the people have in us. Our jobs as legislators will be to advocate for our districts, including every district, every town, every municipality, regardless of what the political affiliation of those leaders are. I will, and I have throughout my life and career, build bridges. I've worked with government entities that did not believe in the same ideology that I had, but I'm able to sit down and work with them. Building those relationships instills the trust that we need in our government. So I promise that if elected, I would represent all of us. The young man I met downtown on Monday, and those that I serve in my current position. I will be a senator that you will be proud of, and ensure that we are getting what we need as a district as a whole, and that we're not going to leave Western Maryland behind. They will know that Western Maryland exists. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Mr. McKay.
Oh, thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you very much to the Chamber of Commerce for hosting this event. It is great to see all these fellow candidates here. You know, one of the things that's going to happen here in a few weeks is we're going to put together a Washington County delegation that is going to go down to Annapolis and be able to carry your values, your word to the halls of Annapolis. So I tend to believe that the most important role of a member of that delegation is twofold. Number one, as you all well know, we have three forms of county government in the state of Maryland. We have a code home rule county, we have a executive and council type of form of government, and then we also have the commissioner form of government. In Washington County, it's a commissioner form of government, and they are the executives of county government. And what they will do, however, they do not have the ability to do legislative. So one of our number one reasons as a Washington County delegation is to carry the water for them and handle those pieces of legislation that needs to come forth to make sure that Washington County is running smooth and the manner in which we would like it to run. Second of all would be about funding. Funding is very, very important, bringing home the bacon from Annapolis. And you need to make sure that you have great relationships. And to do that, you need to be able to work across both party lines, be able to work with both rural and urban legislators, and be able to develop relationships. I am Mike McKay. I'm a father of 8, small businessman, member of the General Assembly in the House of Delegates for the last 8 years, and I'm a former county commissioner in Allegheny County. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Mr. Dreisbach.
Okay. I'm Mike Dreisbach. First of all, you have to know that I grew up in Western Maryland. I grew up in Williamsport. So even when some of you people from South High used to wrestle us or play basketball with us, we still liked you as good competitors. I spent my first 40 years in Washington County. I've had a couple careers. My first career, I raised my daughters here. They all went to Williamsport High School. That's where I went. I was a wrestling coach at Williamsport High School. And when I was here, I ended up in the business world. I went to Fairchild Republic. I ended up later becoming the president of UAW Local 842. When I left UAW 842, I became an international labor mediator and carried that labor mediation business as a career. I've always worked in the middle. I'm actually a Democrat. I'm a blue dog Democrat. So if you don't know what that is, that means that I'm the moderator. I'm the one in the middle that tries to get both sides to work together. I currently live in Garrett County. When I left this morning, I got out of bed, and the dog looked at me at 4 o'clock and went like, "Are you going hunting turkeys or deer? What are you doing?" Because it's 4 o'clock and it's snowing. There's like 1 inch of snow on the ground when I left. So I live in Garrett County. My wife and I started another business. I've always had businesses. I've always been an entrepreneur. And we currently built, run, operate the Savage River Lodge, which I know a number of you have already been there. We also have Cornucopia Cafe, Grants Mercantile, and SRL Outdoors. So for me, as a person going to Annapolis, we've got a big challenge in this particular district because George Edwards, who's a friend, is going to leave. He's going to vacate that spot. And it's going to be really hard to replace him. So what we're going to do, make sure that we replace George and send the right person who's a business person down to Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Dreisbach. Ms. Thiam?
Good morning, everyone. It's pronounced Cham. I know you don't know that, but that's okay. Thank you. Thank you to the Chamber of Commerce for allowing us as candidates to come up and share with you our ideas and how we think our communities can be a more effective community. So as the current delegate who represents District 2B, what I've learned to be the most important characteristics for a member of the delegation, we have to be an effective communicator. And by that I mean we have to work closely with our constituents who we represent. We have to work closely with other members of the delegation. We have to be good listeners. We have to be receptive to other ideas. We have to represent our constituents, so we have to listen to what they have to share. I represent District 2B, so as a member of the delegation, I take my constituents' concerns to the delegation. This is what my constituents want. And as a delegation, they are required and expected, I think, to listen to what my constituents, what they are saying to me. Now, in the Maryland General Assembly, I've learned that you have to be a good salesman for the constituents you represent. You have to tell them what's important for my constituents in 2B. You have to sell it, and you have to sell it well to get them to buy into what it is that you feel like is important for your constituents. You also have to have respectful relationships. It's very important to be able to form good, solid relationships, not only in members in my Republican caucus, where I am a member, but also members across the aisle with the Democrats. We have to be respectful of each other's opinions and ideas. Listen. Don't think it's your way or the highway. So all of those are very important characteristics to have. Good listener, good communicator, advocate for constituents, business owners, because they're looking to us to represent them in Annapolis, and that is my hope to do that if I'm elected to return in January.
Thank you, Ms. Chiam. We next have Ms. Grossman.
We kind of guessed that, right? So good morning, everybody. I'm Brooke Grossman. I want to thank the Chamber for having us, but I also want to thank the ladies who made our breakfast this morning, who probably had to get here even earlier than Mike had to leave Garrett County. I am a nonprofit executive. I'm a mom, and most of you in this room who know me know I am fiercely passionate about this community. And if you ask me what my most important job as your delegate is, it's showing up. It means that not just in the 90 days that I'm in Annapolis representing you, right, and bringing your concerns to the delegation or to the legislation, but in the other, whatever 365 minus 90 is, days, showing up in this community, not just when it's time to ask for your vote, but in the in-between. It is coming to community meetings and not just hearing your concerns, but really stopping to understand them and not telling you what I think the solution to your problem is. Empowering our communities and our citizens to be their own problem solvers, right? Tell me what you want and I'll help you have it. So I really think, you know, from my perspective in this role, the most important thing that a delegate can do is show up and be present regularly, not just 22 days and asleep before an election.
Thank you, Ms. Grossman. So our second question, now that you've gotten comfortable with how interminably long 2 minutes sometimes seems to be, we'll cut you down to 1 minute and see how you do. With a total minority population of just over 23%, Washington County continues to be more culturally and ethnically diverse. This includes 13.2% of our residents who are African American and 6.5% who are Hispanic. Don't get hung up on the percentages. In what ways have you personally experienced the change in demographics, and how do you plan to represent these diverse constituents? And we'll turn first to Mr. Perry.
Well, thank you. To answer that question, what I've noticed especially when I decided to run for office, is the growth of our minority small businesses. They are one of the first people that I contacted when I went out to talk, to understand what their concerns were with starting a business and most of all, maintaining a business. I mean, 20% of small businesses fail in the first year, and by year 10, only 30% are still surviving. And their concern was that they didn't know where to start. So I've taken that back with me. As a minority myself, I've reached out to the communities as we speak. I show up, I'm there. I go to the Latin churches. I obviously visit our communities downtown. I will represent them because they will see someone that looks like them in office.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Mr. McKay?
Well, thank you for the question. It's true, there's no doubt about it, whether you're in District 1 or in District 2, Washington County, the demographics are changing, and they're changing for the better. You know, a more diverse community is more important than anything else, and making sure that everyone's voice is heard and is valued. You know, one of the things that the Speaker of the House, Ms. Adrienne Jones, she appointed me co-chair of the Economic Stability Work Group. And that is a group that makes sure that people who are in the middle class don't fall into the safety net. Now, we are blessed in this country to have a wonderful safety net, but it is being pulled at all parts of the strings. And we need to make sure that that does not unravel, whether it be mental health or it be homelessness. We need to make sure that all our communities are taken care of, including this vulnerable population of a growing, encouraging minority population in Washington County. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Mr. Dreisbach?
Well, there are a lot of underserved different parts of our community, and whether they're even firefighters, even police officers, teachers, they're underserved because of housing issues and those kind of things. When it comes to minorities, I will say that I've worked real hard in Garrett County. Actually, Saturday we're coming down to help try to revitalize the black cemetery in Halfway that most people don't even know about. When I grew up, I remember that place being there, and it's kind of important to bring back that heritage, and respect it. There's a lot of challenges out there when it comes to our underserved populations, and they are black, they are white, they are Latinos. There's a lot of different opportunities for us, and I think that the track record will say, like, you know, we worked real hard to get the AME church in Garrett County moved. It took us about 20 years to respect that particular group of people that never had a chance to be a part of our history.
Thank you, Mr. Dreisbach. Ms. Grossman?
So I think first, I have to acknowledge that their experience is different than my own, right? And that I don't know the answer likely for that community, and that I need to take time, again, to listen and hear what they're experiencing, and celebrate that diversity is a positive thing for us, and that every community right? Every minority group or underserved population in our community brings strength to us. And so as a delegate, then you have to make sure that your legislation that you're writing is written in a way that it'll be equitable when it comes back to our community, that everybody's on an even playing field to access opportunity, that we're not writing legislation that's only going to serve non-minority owned businesses, or putting out grant opportunities that don't get to small businesses or minority-owned businesses. So it's about creating equitable access to resources for all of our citizens.
Thank you, Ms. Grossman. Mr. Baker?
Okay. For most of you, you probably don't know a lot about me, but some of you do. I started my life out in the West End projects, the old projects. My family lived there for 10 years before moving to an old farmhouse out in Pinesburg. So I've been surrounded by minorities and diversity my whole entire life. As an educator, I taught 11 years at the Western Heights Middle School. I loved that school. I dealt with a lot of minority children, and also taught at Tech High, had minorities in my class and worked with them. And about 4 years ago, I played somewhat of a part in putting our local county diversity committee together. I went to our county administrator at that time, and at that time my thought process was a lot of the kids that I had in school, once they left, I knew the minorities, once they left, I knew it was a troubling time for them to try to get employment and so forth in Washington County. So I talked to the administrator about how we could reach out to the minority community and give the minorities a better chance of applying for county government. So for me, I'm going to be well aware of all of the issues and so forth with diversity, and I'm going to be very, very comfortable in that role trying to promote diversity.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Ms. Chiam?
For the question, I think most importantly, what we need to do is help people who are in a minority, other cultures than maybe different than our own. Maybe there could be a business owner who's looking to open a business. We have to make sure that we are providing that person or that potential business owner information, how to apply for grants, how to look for a building that may be in an opportunity zone that may not be a very costly building, might need a little TLC to repair, but providing opportunities for people who are seeking to have better lives. It's also important to possibly cater. Go to these minority-owned businesses. Go to the juice bar. Go to the Jamaican food place. Go to the African store. Spend time. Ask questions. Most minorities aren't afraid to respond and to answer your question. So it's important that we really engage in meaningful conversations to get to know people who are differently than we are.
Thank you, Ms. Chiam. Next, we turn to a couple of questions that relate to education. We'll stick with the 1-minute timer. The question is, what do you see as your role working with our public school system as it continues to educate our workers of the future? And we'll first direct this question to Mr. McKay.
Well, thank you very much for that question. You know, education is one of the major building blocks of development for someone who's going to be successful here in Washington County. You know, for many, many years in Western Maryland, our greatest resource, while someone might say it's timber, might say it's water, may say it's coal, but our greatest resource, natural resource, is our people. And our people need to be able to be educated for a 21st century opportunities. One of the things that we need to do is make sure that the Board of Education has the tools, the funding, and the ability to make sure that our workforce will be able to compete here locally, but also regionally, because our economy, whether it be so close to Pennsylvania or so close to West Virginia, we work simultaneously, and we need to make sure that our young people have the skill set. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Ms. Grossman?
Did you say me, Richard? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. I think, you know, my first responsibility is making sure that public schools stay public, that we don't enforce voucher programs that allow public dollars to be put into private schools. But secondly then is to make sure that the blueprint for Maryland is not only passed, but then when the funds come to Washington County, that they're allocated appropriately to our schools, right? That our kids and our teachers have and our educators have not only access to a world-class education, but access to mental health services in the schools, access to equitable resource allocations across our whole school system, that as we plan for the future, that teacher salaries are accelerating in a way that keeps us competitive. We're not just attracting new teachers who are here for an entry-level salary that's exciting and then travel to other communities.
Thank you, Ms. Grossman. Mr. Baker?
As we all know, many of us in here received a good old-fashioned public education. I myself, I'm sitting here because of coaches and teachers. Had coaches not identified my athletic ability as an endurance athlete back in the 70s, I wouldn't be sitting here today. And I've always respected coaches. I'm got a full scholarship because of coaches and teachers, and you know, I value the good old-fashioned public education. And as we all know, the Constitution says we will receive a free. All students will receive a free education. So we do need to continue fighting for free education for all, and that's going to be part of my responsibility in Annapolis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. So we break up this next section. You might have thought all six were going to get the same one. Now we're getting a little tricky on you now. We have another question that goes for the next three, but you remember you can use part of your time to go back to the first one. So moving on, do you believe that Maryland has a solid plan and the financial resources to fully implement the blueprint for Maryland's future, called the Kerwin Commission sometimes, over the next 10 years? Why or why not? And we'll direct this first to Ms. Chiam.
Thank you very much for that question. As I will never say former educator, I'm always an educator. I worked with Washington County Public Schools for 13 years in their special ed department. And prior to that, I taught in other schools. I was a director of a school for children with autism. So education is very, very near and dear to my heart, particularly with the vulnerable population of students with autism. With the Maryland Blueprint, it's a very costly bill. Over the next 10 years, I believe that bill, if my memory serves me correctly, is going to cost us $3 billion, $3 billion taxpayer dollars to make sure that that law is carried out. At this time, I don't know how we're going to reach that. That's a lot of money. The only way I think we're going to reach that is by, unfortunately, needing to raise taxes. Most of the money that funds education comes from casinos. So maybe spend a little bit more time at the live casinos to make sure that we can take care of that bill, that our students are educated and ready for post-secondary outcomes.
Thank you, Ms. Chiam. Mr. Dreisbach?
Well, without a doubt, it's a big price tag, but I absolutely know that the state is in financially a really great place. Right now, all the little communities that are in this district are in a really great place because of ARPA money coming at them. I do think that we'll figure out how to fund them. I think it's our responsibility to make sure that they are funded correctly. And I'm going to drop back to your first question because I don't want to miss this piece of it. I spent 2 days at the ARC conference in Rocky Gap, and a friend of mine was there, and we were talking about what do you need? What do you need as far as employees? And he said, a plumber. He said, because we have all these pipes that make snow. And for me, I think what we have to really do is we got to pay attention to our education system. We need those skilled trades. We need those electricians and plumbers and HVAC people out there. And I would challenge the school systems out here. Washington County does a much better job than the other two counties. And I had one of my daughters graduate from the Votech Center when she was here. So,
thank you, Mr. Dreisbach. Mr. Perry?
The Blueprint for Maryland is a great plan. It's not if we can fund it, we must fund it, because our children, our next generation, deserve those opportunities to succeed, to make us a better community. So it's not if, we will be able to fund it. And to go back to that second question, teachers have impacted my life immensely. 3 particular, but I only speak of one. My daughter, educator since day one. And when she was 12 years old, she started educating me and opened me to being the man I am today. So I will support our schools. I will support the services that they need, mental health things. I will ensure that we fully fund our public schools because that's what we have to do to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. So we next move on to a series of questions that have more of an economic development focus. How can the legislature support municipalities so that they can more easily address the problem of abandoned and foreclosed properties? And we'll turn first to Mr. Baker.
Well, again, as a legislator, my first priority is going to be to listen to the municipalities, listen to the elected officials within each municipality, and listen to their concerns about homes that are in desperate need of repair, and put in a bond bill at their request to see what we can do to address the issues within those municipalities on the properties that need repair. And I think if you look, our governor is doing a great job at reaching out to the municipalities and coming up with revitalization efforts. At least they are in Hancock, Williamsport, a lot of infrastructure issues. So that's going to be very, very important. And there's where a compassionate conservative in Annapolis will do well, working with everybody across the aisle, trying to bring good things back to our community.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Ms. Chiam?
Thank you for the question. I think it's important that we have those, as a legislator, we have to have good conversations with our local government, with our mayor, with our city council, with our county commissioners, to talk with them and to identify, well, not our county commissioners since it's the municipalities, but have meaningful conversations about how those spaces can be utilized. We could possibly consider tax breaks or incentives for local businesses who may want to invest in our community. What can we give them to entice them and encourage them to come into our community and to invest and to use these blighted communities and buildings that are abandoned and turn them into something that's useful for the community? We have to talk with constituents and get their input and their buy-in and ask them what are their ideas, because again, as a legislator, I represent my constituents and I listen to them, and that is my hope that I can use the information that they offer to help us be a better community.
Thank you, Ms. Chiam. So we're now, you were the third person was expecting that question. We're now we've worked our way down to taking questions in pairs. So, but you can come back. What state-level economic development incentives do you propose to help unique parts of the state like Washington County? And we'll turn first to Mr. Perry.
Good question. Well, I'll go back to small businesses and the conversations I had. We need to ensure that our county, our whole district, because District 2 is not just Washington County, have incentives so where those who need to start a small business have those economic tools, not just the economic tools, but the tools to start those businesses and thrive, not to fail in the first year. I would propose that small businesses receive similar tax breaks that we do for our larger corporations. I would propose that we ensure that there's a one-stop shop for those looking to start a business that they can go to get the information they need to succeed.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Mr. McKay?
Well, thank you very much for the question. So, actually, from a state level, what have we proposed, or what could we propose for unique parts of disadvantaged communities? A couple years ago, we put in a bill that would actually create a two-tier system. Those communities, such as Baltimore City and Allegheny County, have a lot in common, and being right next to Washington County, they could benefit by that as well. And it would be just a two-tier system. It has to do with sales tax, it would have to do with property tax, and it would then, once somebody got to a particular level, they would no longer be qualified for that. Going back to the other question, there's a couple different things from economic development for municipalities. Last year, we actually passed 2 bills that help the town of Williamsport and the town of Hancock as it comes for blight. So there is a blueprint for that right now. And also to remember the George C. Edwards Fund that's going to take care of Garrett, Washington, and Allegheny County. $20 million this year, $10 million, $10 million, and $10 million. It's the greatest opportunity that Western Maryland has.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Your microphone went dead because your time had more than expired. So just so you'll know how that works. Moving on to a third question in this series. Is there anything that Maryland General Assembly can do to address the impact the increase in the cost of living is having on Maryland residents? And we turn first to Ms. Grossman.
Sure. So, I mean, I think that the most important tool we have in impacting the increased cost of living in Maryland is workforce development, right? And bringing high quality careers to Washington County, not just jobs, so that people are earning a living wage, and as the cost of living rises, their wages rise with it, right? I also think at the state level, we have an opportunity to consider helping to secure affordable housing projects. And I want to be very clear, when I say affordable, that is not low income. That means that the people in our community who live and work in our community should be able to afford a home in our community, should be able to afford rent. You can't have rents or house prices for a community that only earns about $48,000 a year per household, 45% less than the rest of the state of Maryland, yet our housing market is equal to that. We need to create stability so that our families can grow, they can have expendable income, and I will follow Dennis Redsign.
Thank you, Ms. Grossman. Mr. Dreisbach.
Can you go back and focus on that question?
Sure.
Give it to me again.
Is there anything that Maryland's General Assembly can do to address the impact that the increases in the cost of living is having on Maryland residents?
Okay, without a doubt, everybody's under the big gun of inflation. It's not just here, it's not just in Maryland, it's everywhere. There are some things that the legislature could do. Back a few months ago when Governor Hogan went back and took care of the gas tax, that took a little bit of relief. But the unfortunate thing is that little bit of relief is very short term. But I think the legislators out there should be able to come up with other alternatives to reduce the pressure on the families that are out there and on our citizens. So, you know, simply we've got the money in the account down there, and we can certainly pull off the tax dollars off of, you know, gasoline, off of propane and those kind of things. But there's got to be some more creative thinking. And I think what happens is a lot of times we have too many bureaucrats and not enough business people down there to solve problems.
Thank you, Mr. Dreisbach. The next series of questions focuses on the health of our community. Are there areas in Maryland current health care law that need to be addressed? And if so, what are they and how would you address them? And we turn first to Mr. Baker.
Yes, there are many healthcare issues here in Washington, or in our state, country, county, et cetera. And obviously the rising cost, many families cannot afford proper health care. So at the state level, we do need to work together collaboratively and come up with a plan as to how we can provide better health services to our community, especially the communities that are underserved. We do have some programs here in Washington County that we support fairly well. That, you know, you have your local clinic through the health department that offers services to our minorities and low-income individuals here in Washington County. So we're just really going to have to work together down there and come up with some plans that are going to benefit all Americans here in Washington County.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Ms. Grossman?
Sure. So obviously the cost of health care is something we can address. I think we also need to consider how people are accessing their health care, right? And investing in telehealth, telemental health, creating those pathways for people to have an ease of access to care. We have in Washington County, or I'll say even actually just in the city, 10% of our community is uninsured. That's unacceptable, right? That is either because they are working at jobs, not careers, that don't allow them to afford healthcare premiums, right? And so they're foregoing it, which also then results in our county being 20th out of 23 counties in one city in the state of Maryland in our overall health. So we have to create better access, not only to insurance, but then to care. People can't have to take a whole day off from work just to get to see the doctor, right? That doesn't make employers happy. Many of you own businesses, you don't want your staff off for a whole day because they have to go, ride 3 buses to get to the doctors.
Thank you, Ms. Grossman. Mr. Dreisbach?
When it comes to healthcare, one of the things that I've learned and still see that's really active out there is our seniors. Our seniors are getting beat up in their healthcare plans, and having negotiated contracts in different unions over my career, people really negotiated for those healthcare systems. And now we have a system where people are trying to attack Social Security and Medicare and go into all these crazy ideas about, well, let's do it every 5 years and then re-up it. We really got to make sure that we protect our seniors out there and the people that have earned their pension plans and earned their health care programs. And I do believe that what should take place is that as we get down to Annapolis, there's got to be some fresh ideas hit the table. And I've got ideas, but there's a whole lot of people out there that have been giving me a whole lot of other new ideas that I didn't expect. And they got some really, really creative ways of looking at things.
Thank you, Mr. Dreisbach. Looking ahead to the upcoming session, what, if any, amendments do you believe should be made to the current family and medical leave insurance legislation? And we turn to Mr. McKay first.
Well, thank you for that question. So while the federal and then what we just passed statewide are good pieces of legislation, it seems to me that what we do need to do is present some form of an amendment to actually make those two work together. Right now, those two programs are working against each other. Businesses are already having so much paperwork and regulations that what is happening is that they have to keep actually 2 different ledgers, one from the federal side following that, and then one from the state side. So a lot of times in Annapolis, bills get passed. It's like making sausage. It's not very pretty, and we have to go back next year's to try to fix those particular issues. And in this case, this is one thing that could be done to make it easier for the business community to implement.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Ms. Chiao?
Thank you for the question. When this bill came last year before us in the Maryland General Assembly, there was a lot of conversation about it. Certainly families and the time off that's needed to take care of an ill family member or an adoption, you need time to take off and spend with your family, is very important. No one is against that, or we're not saying that that's important. Our small business owners, they were the main ones that were in my inbox with regarding this bill, that it's going to be very costly for them. It's going to be very expensive for them to be able to meet the requirements of this law. And certainly, as I mentioned, we want to be supportive of families who need time off to take care of loved ones. But then how do we make sure that these small businesses are able to stay afloat to meet the accommodations of what the law requires? So there needs to be some amendments to kind of go back and talk with business owners to see where can we have some middle ground with regard to that bill.
Thank you, Mr.
Now
Hill.
law.
Mr. Perry?
Your family and issues that happen to them are very important. Not as familiar with the total bill as our current legislators. I will tell you that we will have to look at the bills as, we need to look at the bills, and again, we need to make sure they are in common with what the federal requirements are. We need to work with the small businesses, because I do understand as a small business, they're family, but they will suffer with 12 weeks of leave when they have to pay someone and do not have someone to take over that position. So we would need to, or should, go back and look at how we can work with those business communities and ourselves as families to ensure that there's an equitable balance, to ensure that the businesses are able to survive, but also that people can take care of their families when it's time for medical.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. What legislation, if any, are you going to put forth or support if the adult use cannabis referendum passes? Mr. Dreisbach.
Well, I'm pretty much sure that it will pass. I think that marijuana's gotten to the point, it's not like marijuana was in the 60s and 70s when I was growing up. There are a lot of good medical reasons to do things like medical cannabis, and when it comes to recreational, it's going to happen. And what I want to make sure is when I go down there that we figure out how to do it responsibly, and we should follow the lead of states like Colorado, for example, and figure out how to come up with some new tax dollars off of that opportunity for people. It's just like taxing cigarettes, okay? So I think there's an opportunity for us, for the people who want to engage in and enjoy recreational marijuana. They can help do some things for health care. And I think there's a way that we can make that happen down there, but you're going to have some out-of-the-box thinking. And I do believe it will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Dreisbach. Mr. McKay?
Well, thank you for the question. You know, Maryland may have done this backwards. Instead of setting up regulations and setting up how cannabis would be able to be used if passed on the referendum, we haven't done that. So this question is very, very important because as a legislator, you will be setting up the rules and regulations going forward. I'm not a big fan of taxing it. I tend to believe that marginalizes certain communities against others. And if you're using this for medical purposes, you certainly don't want to be paying taxes on it. But as for recreational, I did vote against it. Most of the people that had contacted me in my office felt that it was a gateway drug. It is, I do believe it will be passed. You'll get the opportunity. It's very important. And we'll see how it all gets laid out in the future.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Ms. Grossman?
1, 2, 3.
Exactly.
I'm not good at numbers. So. Ms. Grossman?
Sure. So I think in terms of legislation, I agree with Mike. It likely will pass. So part of our responsibility is then going to be determining what portion of the dollars are raised from those sales are we putting back into education in our community to ensure that people are aware of the pluses and minuses for them personally of recreational and or medical use of marijuana. Right? So we can take those funds and reinvest in educating our community. We can also then reinvest some of those funds into workforce development programs that teach people how to grow marijuana, right? Hydroponics is going to be a wave of the future when these things are legalized in multiple states. And we can reach into communities where maybe there's already a talent for this, even if it's not legal, and help to path people into long-term sustainable jobs, right, in this field.
Thank you, Ms. Grossman. How should Maryland address the need for treating those dealing with substance abuse disorders? Ms. Chiam.
Thank you for that. This is also an issue that's very near and dear to my heart. Not only our community suffers with the opioid crisis, we all know that it's a nationwide problem. And we have to seek better solutions. I am appreciative of the efforts of our mayor with Washington Goes Purple, raising awareness, which we need to do. People need to know that this is a concern. But I think we need to go a step further. I don't believe that overdose prevention sites is a way to go, which is what our mayor, Scott in Baltimore, is suggesting that he'd like to push. We can't enable people, but we do need to consider what more resources do we need to utilize. We need a treatment center. Some type of facility to help people who are ready to overcome their addiction to go and seek treatment. They need that. We need to help them. We can't do it by enabling them, but we must provide the resources that they need. So if it's a treatment center, more beds at Meritus to help them during their crisis, then we need to make sure that we're providing them those resources to overcome their addiction.
Thank you, Ms. Chiam. Mr. Perry.
Thank you. No one chooses to be addicted. No one really wants to be addicted. So we have to ensure that we are able to provide those resources to help them. We're not going to stop drugs from coming into the country. There's always going to be an avenue for drugs to come in. So what we have to do is to stop, or at least stop the want or the desire by educating our children on the harmful effects of drugs. As a former police officer and narcotics officer, I've interviewed those addicted to different types of drugs, and I could tell you, they did not want to be in that situation, but whatever circumstances got them there, they were in that situation, and they wanted to find help. So it'd be our jobs to ensure that we have those resources to provide the help to those who are looking or wanting or needing to get off prescription drugs or whatever drugs they may be.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Mr. Baker?
I don't think there's any one fix, any one thing that's going to help the populations that are involved in opioid overuse and things like that. I think there's just going to have to be a collaborative effort, come up with various ideas, try various things. Different things are going to work for different people. But ultimately, I think the abuser, the user, is really not going to stop or change their life until they make that decision. I can do many, many things to try to encourage them and help the individuals, but until they make a decision that they want to get clean and they want to get off of the opioids and the drugs and so forth on their own, you know, I just think it ultimately lies there. I know for myself, I used to drink a lot of beer, and back in the 90s, 80s and 90s, I drank a lot of beer, and never did the drug thing. I've never smoked marijuana. I've never done any of that. Never had an interest in it. And I just can remember one time I got pulled over by a city cop or county cop, and I had a case of beer in my truck. Hadn't had any beer in me or anything like that there. And
Thank you, Mr. Baker. We now move to a section we called Law and Order, and we start with one question that goes to everyone. Try doing this with bifocals. This is a real game for me. There were more than 20 new pieces of state legislation adopted in 2021, which directly impact law enforcement. What, if any, concerns do you have with any of the laws, including the repeal of the Maryland Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, the requirement for use of body-worn cameras, and limitations on the use of no-knock search warrants? And we'll go first to Mr. Dreisbach.
I have a lot of friends in Western Maryland that are law enforcement officers, and they, like me, really welcome the idea of body cameras because it does take some of the pressure off of them of being accused of certain kinds of things. I do believe that we need to continue to maybe even more fund our law enforcement people out there, give them more specialized training, and there are things like that we have just kind of pushed on to the back burner. The guys that I know in Allegheny and Garrett County are welcoming some of those changes, and some of them are making them have to do things that they never had to do before. But they're professionals, and we also got to make sure that these guys and gals end up making a little bit more money, because I absolutely know that there are one critical mass of workers out there that are not really, being paid like teachers aren't being paid for the kind of jobs they do and the things we want them to do.
Thank you, Mr. Dreisbach. Ms. Grossman?
I think that the most important thing we can do with those bills is incorporate the voice of our first responders in them, right? I agree with the body cameras being worn, 24/7 when they're on. I think it does protect a police officer as much as it protects the person that they may be encountering. But I think our responsibility, again, is to go back to the law enforcement officers who are directly impacted by these bills and ask them what their experience is and what change they feel they need to be able to effectively do their job. That's my job as a delegate, not to tell them whether or not the bill that I want to pass about law enforcement is appropriate for them. It's to ask the experts.
Thank you, Ms. Grossman. Mr. Delegate Chiam, sorry.
I met with the Fraternal Order of Police, our Lodge 88, a few weeks ago, and one of the concerns one of the retired law enforcement persons stated was the loss of pension when and if a law enforcement officer is found guilty by the Police Accountability Board or the Administrative Charge Committee. They lose their pension. If you've, as a law enforcement, have worked 20 years, you've invested, you've paid money, something happens, you lose all of your pension. I plan to return in January if I'm elected and amend that. That's a lot of years to pay in your retirement, and to lose that from one mistake, I don't think is fair to our law enforcement. Body-worn cameras, absolutely. It's in the camera. What happened? It reveals good information. No-knock warrants, the Democrats originally wanted 30 seconds. That's tying the hands of law enforcement. That's too long. I offered an amendment for 15 to 30 seconds. So I think it's important that no-knock warrants have a time limit for law enforcement, but we can't tie the hands of law enforcement to do their jobs.
Thank you, Ms. Chum. Mr. Baker?
As a delegate, I will be one that will back the law enforcement agencies. I do think the body cameras are excellent. I think a lot of times our officers, they go out and they do an awesome job, and they try to follow every law possible. They know what's at stake for them and what's on the line. I think we need to come up with some better ways of dealing with the repeat offender. I think many times the officers, they get upset because they keep arresting the same person over and over, and there's no real punishment to that offender. And for me, I just think in our country we need to eliminate some laws to protect the average citizen and so forth. I just think we're a land of many laws with no consequences. So we need to really focus in on consequences and reducing the number of laws involved.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Mr. McKay?
Thank you for the question. I want to say that, number one, Delegate Cham is an expert in this particular field. All these bills came before her on the Judicial Committee in Annapolis. There's over 4,000 bills that gets presented each year, and it's the committee system that goes through the process. So if it's about law and order and police accountability, Delegate Cham is your champion for that. As for the no-knock, it needs to be repealed. The body cameras are an excellent addition, but we forgot to fund them. And it's municipalities and counties that have to pick up that funding. The state of Maryland should not be passing things that are unfunded mandates. As for the Bill of Rights, we need to restore that in the Policeman's Bill of Rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Mr. Perry?
Well, catch. I believe I'm the only one up here actually wore the uniform and the badge of trust. All right, so let's start with, I have a unique perspective. I've done the job. The law enforcement officer's Bill of Rights. If I was sitting in a seat, I would not have voted to repeal that as it was. I believe that there should have been a little bit more negotiations when it came to that. I'm old enough to remember when we got cameras in our cars and our officers fretted that because they thought we were going to be spied on, and we got over that. I have served search warrants, and I do understand the inherent dangers on both the police officers and the civilian. And I do not believe that 30 seconds is too long for a no-knock warrant, because there are differences for the different types of warrants that you're going to be doing.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. In light of the recent Supreme Court ruling as it pertains to Maryland's current firearm regulations, how do you propose bringing Maryland into compliance? Ms. Grossman.
I'm sorry, Richard, I didn't hear you.
Okay. In light of the recent Supreme Court ruling as it pertains to Maryland's current firearm regulations, how do you propose bringing Maryland into compliance?
That's a tough one. You know, I think that we as a legislation, again, are going to have to sit down and have some really tough conversations, right? We're going to have to look at how we are addressing the increase in applications for personal carry weapons, how we are then rolling out the training to ensure that everyone who is ready and approved to have those weapons is prepared and educated to do that safely. So I think it's been interesting as we watch things roll out on the national level, and then we try to hurry up and catch up on the state level. And it's going to be our responsibility perhaps to hit pause and make sure that as a group we are developing legislation that brings us into compliance responsibly and makes us effective.
Thank you, Ms. Grossman. Mr. McKay?
The ruling was on the New York law, which automatically made Maryland's law null and void, so we are in compliance. As for carry conceal, I do believe we have a good process in place to be able to give people the opportunity to still exercise their Second Amendment right, but also make sure that people who may have a background that should not have a firearm do not have a firearm. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Mr. Baker?
I am a pro-Second Amendment rights candidate. I believe in the right to carry and bear. Myself, I can remember my first experience handling a firearm. My dad took me deer hunting when I was 13 years old, been hooked on hunting ever since. Not one time in my life have I ever thought, even in my difficult times, have I ever thought about harming anybody or even reverting to my firearm. It just never entered my mind. I think it's a responsibility and a privilege to have the right to carry, and I think our current laws and programs that we have in place, the education and so forth for each individual that wants to carry, they get through the process, and they get the right to carry if they're, if they're okay to carry. So anyhow, I am a pro-right, Second Amendment pro-rights person. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Do you support Maryland honoring concealed carry permits from other states? Why or why not? Mr. Perry?
The answer would be yes, with conditions. We need to ensure that the processes that those who are carrying concealed are the same as ours. Unlike some states, Ohio and others, there's permitless carries. Therefore, there's no checks. And even though these checks aren't exponential, they are a check. So I would support that, as long as their processes are very similar to what we have to go through here.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Mr. Dreisbach?
Yeah, without a doubt, you have to make certain that the process to get a carry permit is going to be equal across the states. And so therefore now what you have happen, you have the federal government getting back involved in it, because many times the states don't talk to each other. But yeah, I would support it. Having lived right next door to West Virginia, everybody in the world has a gun when they go into McDonald's now. And I'm not sure that that makes anything any safer for anybody. But I am 100% for the Second Amendment. I don't think that the Second Amendment gives everybody in the world a right to carry a gun. And we see that happening when it comes to school shootings or church shootings and those kinds of things. So, yeah, but to do a carry permit across the board, we got to make certain that everybody has the same kind of certification.
Thank you, Mr. Dreisbach. Ms. Chiam?
Thank you. I am a proponent of the Second Amendment. I'm a gun owner. I have my conceal and carry permit. I don't go out brandishing my firearm. I carry it carefully. If someone is coming from another state and they want to have a Maryland license to carry their firearm, then certainly if that state that they're coming from does not meet the criteria of what Maryland requires, then that person needs to make sure that they do what they need to do to make sure that they can carry their firearms safely and legally in the state of Maryland. So we have high standards in the state of Maryland. So certainly that has to be respected. If you're coming from another state and you don't meet the qualifications for Maryland, then we have to make sure that we are providing the resources and the training or certification or classes that that person who is aspiring to want to carry a firearm, that they are able to do so.
Thanks, Ms. Chiam. Our last section deals with working effectively in Annapolis. And we start with a question for everyone. The issues facing Washington County are quite different than those in the more highly populated districts of our state. We are interested in how you will represent the unique interests and issues of Washington County and Annapolis. In other words, what is your 30-second elevator speech before the General Assembly in favor of investing in your district? Ms. Chiam.
Thank you. I think it's important to invite the legislators who I work alongside to come and visit Washington County, come and visit Hagerstown, come and meet the business owners who live in my community, come and meet my neighbors, come and shop in the establishments to be able to get to know. Sometimes it's got to go above and beyond a conversation, but invite people back to where you live, where your family lives, where you go to worship. They need to see where you come from, and it has to be more than just talking, but come and see.
Thank you, Ms. Chiam. Mr. Baker?
For me, I do that all the time as a county commissioner, constantly working with people, trying to introduce what we have in our community, in particular with all of the different municipalities. For me, I love sharing what I do with people, what I love to do with people, and offering the opportunity to come out and do some of the things that I love to do and share it with them. You get into the city, most of those, I shouldn't say most, but many of them have never hunted, fished, things like that there. I always offer to take someone hunting, fishing, regardless of their party affiliation and all of that there. I love doing it.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Mr. Dreisbach?
Well, having grown up in Western Maryland and starting out in Washington County, I understand Washington County. I still have lots of relatives who live here. And there's a big difference between Washington County and Garrett County. But you really got to make sure that someone who's going to become your state senator down here understands that big difference and can go down there and make everyone else in the rest of the assembly down there understand that we are really different. And that's going to be a huge challenge. And as a state senator, I'm ready for that one.
Thank you, Mr. Dreisbach. Ms. Grossman?
We're one Maryland, right? That's my 30-second elevator pitch, that each individual county or city across the state brings value. Remember earlier we started talking about diversity and how diversity is a positive thing. And so my 30-second elevator pitch to the rest of the delegation is that we are one Maryland, and when one county succeeds, we all succeed. So it's our responsibility to work together, all of us, all 24, to make sure that one Maryland moves into the 21st century.
Thank you, Ms. Grossman. Mr. McKay?
Thank you. The one word that would come to my mind to make sure that we take the unique issues here in Washington County is experience. And I'm going to follow the exact same path that I've followed over the last 12 years as an elected official. Give you an example, I have Speaker Adrian Jones coming up next week to see all the different projects within Washington and Allegheny County. It's our relationship that brings the Speaker of the House here. It's our relationship that will make wins in Washington County and make sure that the state of Maryland knows where we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Mr. Perry?
Thanks, Brooke, for taking my answer. When I echo what Brooke says, when Washington County and Frederick County, Allegheny, Garrett, all of us thrive, Maryland thrives. Investment in our county is investment in Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Washington County receives more money from our General Assembly than it sends to Annapolis. How do you plan to seek even more robust funding from the state to the county? Mr. Dreisbach?
Well, you're very similar to where I live. I mean, we in Garrett County get a whole lot more money than we actually put out. But I think the balance becomes and I'll go back to that idea of one Maryland. We really got to absolutely make sure that Western Maryland holds its own, that Western Maryland gets more than what just falls off the table. And I think over the last few years, George Edwards has done a really great job, don't get me wrong. But we're to a point now in the next 4 years, if we want to hold our own, we better send the right person down to Annapolis. And somebody that wants to represent Western Maryland is really important. If you try to send somebody who wanted to go to West Virginia, then we're going to be in big trouble. So you got to absolutely make sure, in order for us to hold our own, we send that right person down there.
Thank you, Mr. Dreisbach. Mr. McKay?
Well, thank you for the question. So at the end of the day, Maryland is going to end up having a $4 billion surplus. And the best way to make sure that that funding comes to Washington County, as well as the other counties in Western Maryland, is through relationships. 8 years on the Appropriations Committee, also on Public Safety, and also on the very important Capital Committee. That's how you make sure that funding comes back to Washington County, making sure that those relationships still stand. And I look forward to serving on Budget and Tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Ms. Chiam?
I think it's important that we get to know the right people. In the House of Delegates, we have the chairman of the Appropriations, and that's the committee you want to be on, because that's where the money is. That's where the money is being talked about, and that's where the money is sort of been disseminated back to various municipalities. So I think it's important that having conversations with that with that chairman, to come and visit Hagerstown, come and visit my constituents, come and see where I live, come and see where I shop, come and spend some time. And you can't just ask and then go sit on your hands and think that you're going to get it. You got to go back again and ask again. You've got to catch them in the hallways. You've got to catch them crossing the street, going over to the State House. You got to catch them in the bathroom at the sink washing their hands. You can't give the people a moment of time to not know who is Hagerstown. What do we need? You've really got to be very assertive and very aggressive to make sure that we are taken care of.
Thank you, Ms. Chiam. Mr. Baker?
For myself, I'm going to go down there. I'm going to be a very compassionate person, as I am. I don't have a mean bone in my body. And, I'm going to have to work across the aisles. I'm going to have to rely on the various groups here in our community, Greater Hagerstown, municipal leaders, everybody. It's going to be a collective effort, and I'm going to have to go down. I'm going to have to do my best that I can do as far as selling our community. And again, I'm going to be relying on a lot of the people from our community that already has the contacts down there. We're going to have a new governor. It's going to be very imperative that I go down there and I make a lasting impression and let them know that I do guide from my heart, and I will work diligently for my community.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Mr. Perry?
Relationships are very important. Relationships that I currently am forming with those who probably be in power. So having those relationships and understanding the needs and concerns of all the uniqueness of where we live is very important to ensure that they work with you. When I go to Annapolis, I will meet with every elected official here, and I'm going to take a suitcase of wants and needs, and we're going to understand when we get down there. I'm going to develop those other relationships. These are the priorities, and this is what we need to invest into our community and invest into our state.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Ms. Grossman?
Sure. So I certainly agree with relationships, and I am not a business expert, but my thought is that the proof is in the pudding, right? That if we want people to invest in us more, then we need to show that the investments they've already made have become successful, right? We had 4 huge groundbreakings here yesterday. And so we have a medical school coming, a rail company coming, a field house, and a downtown baseball stadium. So then we have to be effective with how we spend those dollars, and they need to be successful, right? We need to, when we ask for funding to come into our community, and we see lots of great Facebook posts about $500,000 is going here or $400,000 is going there, but we don't see many about what happens later, right? And if we want to continue to build those relationships and be effective across the aisle in Annapolis, then we have to show that we're being fiscally responsible and that we're building projects that work.
Thank you, Ms. Grossman. What type of enabling legislation does Washington County need to compete economically, given the unique geographical location in a 4-state region? Mr. Perry.
As you said, we are unique. We have surrounding jurisdictions. We have Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and if you want to say, really, Ohio. that could come here really quickly. We are set for what we're doing right now, logistics. That's why they come to us, Amazons of the world, UPSs of the world. But what we need to do is invest in those higher paying jobs. Engineering. I'm a father of a student who's an engineer. He doesn't want to leave Washington County, but he may have to when he leaves, when he graduates school. So those are the type of things we need to do. We need to demand the Amazons of the world not only build warehouses here, but bring some of those technical jobs to our area so that our community, our generations next, can thrive and don't have to travel outside.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Mr. Baker?
Again, it's going to be working with the entire Western Maryland delegation to come up with enabling legislation and to keep doing what we're currently doing. We don't want to lose focus of how far we've come, and we want to continue to grow. For me, I think the most important jobs that we could bring to Washington County would be your trades jobs. We need more trades jobs. They're good paying jobs. And we also need a lot more manufacturing. As you said, she mentioned yesterday, Hitachi's coming there. They're going to be employing up to 400 manufacturing jobs. They're going to be decent paying jobs, benefits, and so forth. And I think that's the important thing is we've got to keep doing what we're doing and then slowly add with enabling legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Mr. Dreisbach?
As I look at the whole district from Garrett all the way to Washington County, we really got to have legislation starting to prepare us for housing. You guys down here are in a big crunch. You know, it's hard for me to believe that I-81 and 70 corridor now has become the mega for everybody to build a warehouse. We've got the same problem on the other end when you look at Interstate 68 and 79. And when I bring those two up, we've got to figure out how to help all of our people out there come up with an affordable house. And we've got to get the government downstate to start investing in some of those types of things. And I also have to say that, you know, go back to an earlier question, we've got to do a better job like Brooks House here in this county. In Garrett County, we're doing the same kind of a thing. There's a lot of human trafficking that goes through I-70 and 81 that we're not paying any attention to. And we have the same problem in Garrett County. It all brings in the drugs and it all brings in those things that we're trying to solve, but we're not paying enough attention to them.
Thank you, Mr. Dreisbach. Next question. How do you plan to protect and promote the agricultural industry of the county while in Annapolis? Ms. Grossman.
So I think the first thing is we need to look at where we are allowing businesses to be built in our community, right? We're seeing lots of large warehouses come, which is taking away forest. It can potentially take away farmland. And so as businesses are flocking, hopefully at one point in time, to come to Washington County, we have to, kind of look at the balance of that. Are there facilities that could be repurposed, right? To an earlier question, we were talking about foreclosed upon properties, right? We have a wealth of large vacant buildings sitting across our community, right? And so as businesses are coming, is there opportunity for us to build legislation and funding that may make redeveloping a property attractive, right, so that we can protect our farmland and our forests?
Thank you, Ms. Grossman. Ms. Delegate Chiam.
I attended just last week a meeting and dinner, a banquet with the Maryland Farm Bureau. And the conversations that occurred in that room were very promising. Washington County, yes, we are flourishing. We are blowing up. We're doing great things in our community. But we also have to respect the beauty of the farmland that we have. So some areas may not need to be touched. Let's just keep it farmland. Other areas we should expand. New businesses want to invest in our community. We shouldn't resist that to some degree. New businesses want to look at Hagerstown and say, I want to be there in that community. And we certainly should continue to invite them to come. But then on the flip side, some of our area needs to be protected. Some of our farm areas need to be just that, farming for milk and cows and dairy and things of that nature. Some things need to be kept sacred in Washington County, so I think we need to honor that.
Thank you, Ms. Chiam. Mr. McKay.
Thank you for the question. Ag community is very, very important, and it starts with education. We did pass a couple years ago legislation that made sure that each county had an ag education program in their high schools to people to understand where exactly food comes from. It's said that we are 4 to 5 generations away from the farm. People don't just understand that Martin's is the one that grows the lettuce. They just don't understand that. Second of all, as it comes to warehousing and expanding, look, I am a property rights guy. We do have zoning in place in Washington County, but I'm a property rights guy, and I'll be darned if somebody's going to tell somebody what they can and can't do with their piece of property just because you don't like it. If it's zoned a certain way, that's something different. But we're not going to pass legislation to take people's property rights away.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. How are you going to strike the balance between economic growth and housing needs versus protecting the agricultural industry? And as luck would have it, Mr. McKay, you get this one first.
Can you repeat the question again, please?
Sure. How are you going to strike the balance between economic growth and housing needs versus protecting the agricultural industry?
I think the first thing we need to do is to strengthen our urban areas. We have plenty of housing that needs to be redeveloped in our urban areas. It has been told that we have a very high percentage of housing. Not everybody wants to live in an older house. Not everybody wants to be a member of this old house television show. But I'm telling you, that's where we need. We need to redevelop the existing areas where we're at. That's how we strike the balance, by honoring people's property rights. Just to piggyback from that other question, I tend to believe you should look for somebody in the legislature when it comes to agriculture, for somebody who has been endorsed by the Maryland Farm Bureau 3 election cycles. Thank you. And that is me, Mike McKay.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Ms. Chiam.
I think it's important that all of those areas be honored and respected. As I mentioned earlier, Hagerstown is really flourishing. A lot of businesses are investing in us. There's a lot of economic growth, and certainly with that, people are moving into our communities, and they need somewhere to stay. Not all of the jobs that we're bringing in our community are paying a 6-figure salary. So we do need to make sure that we're providing housing for people who might need that, and also protecting our agriculture. Now, we might need to look at redeveloping and renovating some of these old spaces that we have. Do we really need to create new houses for people to live in? Maybe not. Let's look at what we currently have. What can we renovate? What can we redevelop? What can we remodel and make new again? And just put a little TLC on that old dilapidated property and make new. So we certainly want to make sure that we are growing economically. People are moving in our community and investing, but we also have to make sure we're honoring the agriculture here in Western Maryland.
Thank you, Ms. Chiam. Mr. Perry.
There is a balance. People need places to live. We also need food, and we want to keep the beauty we have. But before I start, we also need to ensure that those generational farmers aren't selling their properties because they can't afford it, or they got to pay such exorbitant taxes on an inheritance. That's one reason why we're losing quite a few farms. But when it comes to development, yes, we have to look in our urban areas. We have to get investors to actually help develop those to places where it's high density and it's affordable, so that we have places for our generation, for us to live, that we can afford. And the balance will be for going out in the county or wherever it needs to be, because we do need other places for other people to live. We can't all be in the city of Hagerstown.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. The General Assembly recently passed legislation mandating a transition to cleaner energy going forward. How do you propose balancing the cost of these mandates against the benefits of these mandates? Mr. Baker.
Well, everything I read, to go green, you have to have a lot of green. Many of our citizens in my district certainly can't afford all of these electric cars, can't afford all of the costs associated with going green, and I believe the research is starting to really show that electric cars aren't really there's no more advantage to an electric car than a gasoline car, because when you start disposing of the batteries associated with that, the ways that you're going to be charging the batteries, the expense of replacing the batteries, and now we're sitting here talking about affordable housing. So with all of these new laws on energy being passed and so forth, I just think we're just setting ourselves up for a lot of failure within our communities.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Mr. Dreisbach?
You're talking to somebody who drives an electric car. I came down here this morning with my electric Volkswagen. My businesses have all one sustainability. We have a large solar system. We do all kinds of things, and we've been recognized across the state. The responsibility of a delegate or a senator coming from Western Maryland is to be a leader. And if you want to sit back and you want to worry about what happened before, there are a lot of people out there just like me that are worried about the environment, and we want to make certain that environment is protected for my kids and for my grandkids. And Terry, you need to do some more reading, because we're going to be way ahead of the curve. And I'm not running against you, but you need to do more reading.
Well, many of the people in our community can't afford electric cars. You may be pretty wealthy, but most of the people that I represent aren't very, very wealthy.
I didn't want to bait him into doing that, but can I get 5 more seconds? No. All right, that's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Dreisbach. Ms. Grossman?
I think it's an opportunity for us, and I think we should treat it as one, right? I think as we are acknowledging that climate change is real, that we have to adjust the way that we're doing things, that we then also educate our community on the opportunities that come along with that. With solar power, with wind energy, there's job creation, right? There's opportunity for us. And actually, there's opportunity for us even in the previous question around being sustainable and renewable. When we're talking about, protecting our farmers, I think we also could consider creating, a new line of business for them, if you will, by teaching people in our urban communities how to farm, right? Redevelop some of our city properties into urban farms so that our cities are becoming sustainable and our young people are engaging in activities like growing, producing, cooking their own food. So I think our responsibility is obviously to protect our planet. We want it to be here for future generations, right? We have to make sure we're doing it in a way that is financially responsible, but I honor your red sign, Donna.
Thank you, Ms. Grossman. I don't think we've had any candidate that actually stopped without a comma in the middle of a thought. We're moving to our closing, and we will be addressing this question to all 6 of you. What makes you the best candidate for the position for which you're running? And we will allow you a minute for this. This is like your elevator speech times 2. You went twice as many floors. But what makes you the best candidate for the position? And we'll start with Ms. Chiam.
Thank you. In October of 2020, I was appointed by Governor Hogan to serve in the Maryland General Assembly, first African-American woman to serve in the Republican caucus in Maryland's history. I do that with honor. I do that with a sense of pride, and not just pride for myself, but pride for Hagerstown. We made history, not just me. I formed good, solid relationships in the Maryland General Assembly, not just with my colleagues in the Republican caucus, but Democrats too. I think I can say that I have good relationships with Democrats. I'm able to extend the olive branch and work across the aisle. I've proven that, I've done that, and I plan to do that whenever I return in January. It's not easy sometimes when you're working with someone who may believe in something differently than you, but there has to be some compromise. There have to be some give and some take, some push and some pull. And I'm the person who's able to do that with my experience in the Maryland General Assembly.
Thank you, Ms. Chiam. Mr. Perry.
Service, sacrifice, community. Those are 3 words that has been instilled in me in my life, and that's how I live my life. And what I've done throughout my life, I didn't choose service, it chose me. The reason I'm the best candidate is because I am able to reach and work with anyone, regardless of their thoughts. I'm not going to vilify you or desecrate you because of my thought of you because of your political party. I'm willing to work. I need to work. I want to work. I will be a voice for all of our constituents. I'm a better candidate, or the best candidate for this position, because I care. I truly care. I am a role model. On Monday, I got the biggest endorsement when a young man walked up to me, and he knew me from Facebook, and he looked in my eyes, and I guess he saw himself and gave me the biggest hug. That's why I'm running, and that's why I'm the best candidate.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Mr. McKay.
Well, thank you again to the Chamber. I believe this is our closing. So thank you very much for the Chamber for this opportunity to be able to speak to you. I believe that measurable success is gauged upon what somebody has been able to do. In the last 8 years in Maryland General Assembly, we have passed many bills that have impacted both economic development as well as rural Maryland health. I was Legislator of the Year in 2022 when it came to rural health. And when the new speaker, Adrienne Jones, was announced in the Baltimore Sun, she listed all of her new leadership positions, and at the end was Delegate Mike McKay, co-chair of the Economic Stability Work Group. This proves that I'm able to work across party lines. My years of service of delivering measurable success allows people to see that while I am human, make mistakes, I am also willing to work with everyone to succeed for Washington County. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Mr. Baker.
I'm going to be a great candidate. I've been supported by local municipality government. I was a vice mayor and also a council member for the town of Clear Spring. I've been a 4-term, 16-year county commissioner here in Washington County. I've been president 2 terms for the Washington County Commissioners, and I've also been vice president for 2 terms. So I pride myself on listening to the people in the communities that my vote's going to affect. And I've done this my whole entire career. I go into a community that my vote's going to affect. I listen to the people, and I always support the people that my vote's going to affect. I don't live in that community, so it's important to me not to vote the way that I could vote. It's important for me to vote the way the citizens expect me to vote within that community. So I do pride myself in working with the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Mr. Dreisbach.
Well, first of all, thank you guys for doing this because we need to do more of this. I'd like to have about 6 or 7 more before our November election. I'm the best candidate, first of all, because I'm a real small business person. I grew up here. I spanned the whole spectrum from Hagerstown all the way to Oakland. I've always wanted to fight for Maryland, and I will tell you that Maryland is going to stay in the state. Western Maryland is going to stay in the state of Maryland. The guy I'm running against is the guy who led the charge to take it to West Virginia. And I hope you all remember that down here because all my Republican friends down here were completely blindsided by an opportunity to, let's go to West Virginia. And I don't know how you feel about it, but if I lived down here, I wouldn't want to vote for a person who wants to go to West Virginia. So I'm the best guy. My friend George Edwards has been very helpful all the way through, and I live right next door to George. So we're looking forward to this one.
Thank you, Mr. Dreisbach. Ms. Grossman.
I need to make a comment. That was not a true comment when he said the person that he's running against is leading the charge. I know, I'm sorry. But I just want to tell the truth.
Go ahead, Ms. Grossman.
I know who led the charge. It was not him.
Gentlemen, are we good?
It's
Okay.
your turn.
Thank
Would
you.
Start talking.
Well, thanks. I'm the best candidate for the job because I show up. I show up and I do the work. I'm doing it now, right? I am not sitting in front of you today for the first time. Many of you are victims of my showing up, right? Are victims of me continuing to come to your door every day and say, this isn't working. We have to do something different to serve our community. I didn't need to be appointed or elected to do that, and I'll continue to show up either way because I'm passionate about this community. Probably, again, some of you might think this to a fault sometimes, but the reason I'm the best candidate for the job is because I'm not focused on just one part of Hagerstown or one problem that we have as a community. I recognize that from economic development to substance use access to mental health treatment to health care to funds and education, that all of those things are what make us a healthy community, and that we have to be working on them constantly, so that I have to be watching and showing up everywhere. My family, I think, thinks I moved out. because I've been showing up so much, and I will continue to do so, and that's what you deserve.
Thank you very much, Ms. Grossman, and thanks to all the candidates that have come to visit with us this morning. We appreciate your responses, your engagement. We are fortunate to have individuals in our community that are willing to give of themselves to serve in these difficult positions. So may we give them a round of applause for their work.
And I know meters started at 9, but we got a little bit of time here, so don't panic. We're going to get out here in 2 minutes. Speaking of round of applause, let's thank Richard Wilson for his work this morning's moderation. Thank you. Not an easy job to keep us on task. And again, thank all our candidates for throwing your hat in the ring for running for public office. We know it's a challenge. You're doing all your other work and personal responsibilities, so thank you. I want to thank Jamison Doors again for their sponsorship. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you for your continued support of our forums. Thank Mike Schultz and Ryan Smetzer for our IT and social media support. Good job, gentlemen. I was monitoring you on Facebook, and nice job with all the work you're all doing. I know it's not easy, so thank you. And lastly, thank each of you for being here, for understanding hopefully the issues that we're dealing with and getting to know the candidates. The Chamber does not endorse candidates. We support getting to know those running for office, focused on business. So thank you all for being here. Again, meters start at 9. You have probably a few more minutes before you start getting tickets. They give us a little bit of time on these days. Be safe and get out and vote. Thanks.
Thank you.